these three logics. The difficulty of what we have been talking about here today is that the military professions are not pure professions. They are in fact both bureaucracy and profession. They are structured as a hierarchical bureaucracy. They want to be professions. And when I teach this subject to the general officer classes and other places that I lecture at the War College this week, the bottom line of this discussion is very straightforward to say. Who determines at any point in time if a military profession is a profession or a bureaucracy? The answer is very straightforward. The colonels and the generals. That's it. Nobody else has the power or the authority to make the organizational culture one in which professionals can survive. Because the colonels and generals control the major management structures of the bureaucracy. And it's all there together. Bureaucratic and hopefully professional. Captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels just can't do that. Here's the difference. Some stark contrast between profession and bureaucracy, and yet the challenge to the military, one half of this civil-military relationship, the challenge of the military is what's dominating? Is profession dominating bureaucracy and we're really behaving as a profession? Or is bureaucracy dominating? Notice the aspect of profession: expert knowledge, lifelong learning, practice by humans. Professionals just use technology. They're not driven by technology. The quintessential practice of a profession, as I'll show you in a minute, is the repetitive exercise of discretionary judgment. Think of a young officer going down the street in Baghdad on patrol. How many times will she make a decision? No computer out, no formula out, just abstract knowledge in the head. Exactly the same way a doctor diagnosing and treating in a clinic, or a lawyer sitting in the office writing a case brief. The exercise repetitively of discretionary judgment. That's what professionals do. And that's what we want professionals doing. And only if there is a certain culture, atmosphere, environment, command climate, can they do that. Otherwise, they will be thwarted in that effort and will be conformed into the mold of a bureaucrat. The new theory of professions from Andrew Abbott, this is how it looks on a chart. Now, probably for most people in this room, the last time you studied professions was Huntington in 1957. I'm working now on a book that is a 50-year reprise of Huntington. Well worth doing. And much of what he said is good, accurate, true, and also flawed. And so how much of that we understand for today and how much is applicable for today, that's what we're working on this other project that I'm working on. All professions have jurisdictions where they practice, and if you look on the chart at the top, these are the negotiated jurisdictions done in the joint staff by the military departments, and this is where all military professions today practice. Can they practice equally in all four domains? Do they have enough resources to be in all of those at once? Are they able to negotiate out of one domain and into another? Are they doing too much in Homeland Security and not enough in stability ops? That's what colonels and generals determine, and that's why they're the only people that can make a profession, a military profession, a profession and not a bureaucracy. Now look below the dotted line. Every profession in America, medical, legal, theological, accountancy when it re-earns it, and the military, has two internal domains. You have to develop the expert knowledge of the profession. You have to develop it into professionals. We've taken the expert knowledge of military professions and put it in four baskets. The military technical, how do you fight wars? The moral ethical, how do you fight wars rightly? The way the American people expect them to be fought. The political social or the political cultural, how do you operate in other cultures? Like OSD, like the Joint Arena, like Iraq, like NATO, like the interagency discussion that we had this morning. How comfortable, adaptable, and capable are military professionals with that knowledge? Clearly one of its weakest knowledges. Then the last knowledge is quintessentially that of a profession. How do you develop humans? Because professions do their work humanly. The repetitive exercise of discretionary judgment. What does the map of one profession's knowledge look like? I know you can't read the little words, but let me just note for you that if it's green, in our two studies, this is what we told the Army. This is your core expert knowledge. notice how little of the knowledge down the left-hand side of the page is green. There are only few things that are absolutely core to a land combat profession. Some are joint, and then as you get over to the right, there are areas that we can draw from society, and there's expertise that you can in fact contract out, and some you can contract in. Sadly, in both books, we concluded that the Army was contracting out willy-nilly, with no reference to the map of expert knowledge. Why? Because the Army didn't have a map of its expert knowledge. This was created by an Army scholar. There is no map of the Army's expert knowledge, and I haven't found one from either of the other military professions. If you don't know the boundary of your expert knowledge, and you can't predict what expert knowledge the client is going to want 6 years down the road, what kind of problems do you induce in a military profession? Just what happened in Baghdad in 2003. The profession got to Baghdad in 2003, and the client said, do counterinsurgency. And the profession said, I can't do that. I don't have any expert knowledge. And I have no professionals expert in the practice because I have no expert knowledge. See, that's what strategic leaders of professions, they have to look at the expert knowledge of the profession now and 6 years in the future to 10, create the knowledge, develop it in humans so it can be practiced when the client wants it, not when the profession wants it. That's the role of strategic leadership of professions. Expert knowledge, development of professionals, negotiation of jurisdictions. Now that's a fundamentally different way of looking at professions that I would submit before I started this discussion that you had in your head. Incidentally, if you look at one of the services today and say, is this service a profession? Where would you look? I've just given you the answer. Are they creating new expert knowledge? Are there any military professions in Europe today? There are only 2 militaries in Europe creating new expert knowledge. The rest of them are obedient military bureaucracies. That's what military professions morph into when the strategic leaders of professions take their eye off the ball and stop looking at expert knowledge, developing humans, and negotiating jurisdictions. So, there's the quintessential practice. Now let's get to the topic of today. Here's a chart of military dissent prepared by 2 fellows, colleagues at the War College, Lenny Wong and Doug Lovelace. It's on their website if you're interested, the Strategic Studies Institute. How do we think about dissent now that we have a different picture of what a profession is? Now on this chart, Lenny and Doug have listed 8 ways that military officers or leaders may dissent, and they have listed them in quadrants with kind of their take on how you might expect military leaders to dissent, depending upon the resistance to their expertise from civilian leaders and how grave the threat is of national security. This is a 2-factor analysis. This is putting the issue of dissent primarily in the policy world. Is the policy, the issue over which they are dissenting, vitally important to the safety of the Republic? And do you have any chance the civilian leaders are going to listen to you when you go back the 2nd and 3rd and 4th time? And notice in the upper right-hand quadrant, higher threat to security, higher expected resistance, they have listed more forms of dissent and the really difficult forms of dissent, going all the way up to resignation. The most extreme form of dissent. Now, this is a 2-factor analysis. Since I'm someone who studies professions, I tend to prefer to think about a different way of thinking about dissent. And before I show you the chart, let me introduce you to 2 other ideas. Why do professions exist?